Welcome everyone. My name is Devin Sears. Thank you for tuning in today. Today we're going to be talking about 6 steps for a seamless migration. We know that when you build out your WordPress site, sometimes you put a lot of time and effort into it, and the thought of migrating your website from an old host to a new host can be very daunting. So we wanted to take some time and walk you through that process, answer questions that you might have, and hopefully take out some of the fear that might be associated with migrating your website. So to begin, I'm Devin. I'm joined today by Gabe. I'll be your host. Gabe will be walking you through the presentation. But before we get into things, let's start with a couple housekeeping items. If you can hear us, drop your favorite emoji or give us some signs of life in the comments or the question area. And on that note, while people are doing that, if you do have a question, I'll be in the background answering those throughout the presentation. And then at the end, we'll make sure we have some time for Gabe to answer some of those questions as well. If you are having difficulties with the technical side of the webinar, try logging out and logging back in. That fixes most of the issues. But if you need further help, feel free to screenshot this page and call the GoToWebinar help desk, and they should be able to help you out with this. Okay, I've gotten some signals that we are all good as far as audio goes, so let's keep going. Some important information. Don't feel like you need to follow each step right now. As I mentioned before, migrating a website can be very daunting. There's a lot of steps. Sometimes you're exporting your files. Sometimes you're waiting to hear back from your old host so that they can give you a backup on your website. We understand that we're going to be covering a lot of information today. It's going to be fairly content heavy, but don't worry. We will be recording this. The recording should be available within the next 24 to 48 hours. So don't stress about that too much. Like I said, this webinar, the slides that we're talking about right now, some extra resources, some of the FAQs from today, and all of that will be available at this blog article. Also, in your GoToWebinar control panel on the side, you should have a handout available. We came up with a checkbox of all of the different steps that we're going to be going over today that will walk you through everything necessary for migrating a site. So as long as you follow those, and you can refer back to this video, you can use that handout at a later time, you should be in a good spot with a site migration. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Gabe. Gabe, why don't you tell us about yourself and what you do at Bluehost?
All right, thank you so much, Devin. My name is Gabriel. I usually go by Gabe, and I'm a senior migrator at Bluehost. I've been there for almost 4 years at Bluehost. So I've been migrating a lot of websites, like hundreds, maybe even thousands over the time that I've been migrating websites. So yeah, I'll be going over a lot of the steps that you'll need to go through in order to do a WordPress migration. And if you follow these steps, it should be fairly seamless and straightforward. Again, like Devin said, you feel free to not follow all of these steps right now, because some of these steps may take a little bit more time, maybe a day or two, depending on outside factors that are kind of outside of your control. So again, this recording will be available for you at the end of the session. But also, stay until the very end, because you'll have a chance to ask questions, so that if there's any sort of doubt about any steps, you can get your questions answered here today as we're going through the steps. So without further ado, let's just jump right in. So some of the things that we'll be covering today, there's going to be 6 major overarching steps. And actually, let me go ahead and shut off my camera so you guys can just focus on the content here, and I'll come back on after. So again, there's going to be 6 major steps that we'll be covering here today. The very first one will be just general preparations, some things and housekeeping that you'll need to do before you start your migration. After that, we're going to start moving into database preparations, and I'll talk about a little bit more on what a database is and why it's useful for your WordPress website. Then we'll move over into uploading your WordPress backup into your file manager. So essentially, you're going to be dealing with files that are critical to your website's function. Then in step 4, we're going to be configuring those WordPress files. And that'll make sure that after you've uploaded your files, everything starts to actually work with your website. You know, where essentially it's kind of like plugging your website into the wall socket, so to speak, so that it powers on and it's ready to go. And then step 5 will be finalizing your migration. There's going to be some key steps that you'll want to take in order to make sure that as you're migrating your website to Bluehost, that it is actually visible on Bluehost. And then at the very end, we're going to be reviewing your website, essentially just a visual confirmation that when you visit it, that you're able to see it. So those will be the 6 major steps. There will be some sub-steps underneath those, which are just kind of like the instructions on how to get through each one of these. So with that being said, let's get started. So step number 1, preparations. So the very first thing that you'll want to do as a part of step 1, and whenever you're starting a migration, is you need to collect a website backup. And this backup will be of your WordPress files, and it'll be a backup of your database. Now, your WordPress files are going to be the critical files that you need, or that your website will need in order to function. So without these, your website just won't function. And then your database backup file contains the sensitive data that is stored on your website. So things like your users, if you have multiple users, like administrative users or subscribers. If you're an e-commerce website, this is where all your products are. This is also where all of your orders are. Your pages, your blog posts, all of that stuff is stored in your database. So without your database, your site will look kind of plain and bare. So these are the 2 key things that you'll need in order to complete the website migration itself. So I mentioned you need backups. So where do you get these backups? The actual way that you can get a backup of your website varies. There's a myriad of ways that you can go about this, but the one way that we recommend, since it just is generally easy to cover all avenues, is to contact your old hosting provider. If you have an old hosting provider, a third party, you can usually contact them via chat or via phone. And when you do so, you can just let them know, hey, I'm looking to migrate my website. Can you provide me a backup of my WordPress files and my database file? And they should be able to either just give you like a quick download link that allows you to download these files to your computer, or they might just show you the steps that it'll take to actually create those backups yourself so that you know how to do that on their platform. So again, this is the way that we would recommend that you do this, especially if you haven't done any migrations before. That way it stays relatively simple and you won't have to really do a bunch of stuff to get these. For your WordPress file backup or your website files, you will usually get a file that will be under a .zip file extension. And for your database backup, you will usually get a file that is a .sql file extension. So if you look on the right-hand side of this slide here, you'll see a little screenshot of some example files that you can see. I have my-website.zip and my-database.sql. And this is usually what your old hosting provider will give you. Once you get these files from your old hosting provider, what you'll want to do is save these to your computer. Once you save it to your computer, just take a note of where you save this, either on your desktop, maybe you saved it on your downloads folder, just wherever you've saved it on your computer, take note of it, because you'll need to reference that later as we continue through the steps here, okay? So let's move on. After you've collected the database and the website files, we're going to be logging into your Bluehost account. So a lot of you may already know the steps to do this, but you can just visit bluehost.com on your browser of choice. And in the top right corner, you'll see a login button. You can just click on that, and you can just log in with your email and password that you set up when you created your account. And once you do this, you'll be taken to your Bluehost account dashboard. Usually you'll know that you're logged in. There'll be a sidebar along the left side. It might show you the current websites that you own, but this will be all available for you. And you can see on the right-hand side here, there's just a quick animation of how you get logged in. So once you're logged into Bluehost, then and you have your website file backups, then we are good to go to move on to step 2, which is going to be the database preparations. Now, the database preparations is just so that we can have essentially a container to house our all of our database data into. So we have a .sql file on our computer, and essentially we're going to put all the contents of that .sql file into this newly created database. So that's essentially what we're going to be creating right now, is that container. So the first step here in creating a database is along the left-hand side of your Bluehost dashboard, you're going to see the sidebar. And at the very bottom left, there will be an advanced tab. If you click on that advanced tab, you will see a databases text that you can click on, as you can see by my image on the right there. And once you click on databases, you will be taken to a new page. This is where you will do all of your setup for your database. So for example, we're going to be creating the database first. So on this page, if you scroll around, you'll eventually come across the create new database section, as you can see by my image here. And all you really need to do is type in the name of your database. It can be anything you want. In this example, I just typed in my site and in yellow. So once you've typed in the name of your new database that you're going to create, go ahead and click the Create Database button, which is in blue, as you can see here. And that will create the database. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. It will take no time at all to do that. It's almost like creating a new Word document or anything like that. It just gets created. Make sure you write down either on a piece of paper or on like a Word document. If you're working on your computer, make sure you write the name of the database down so that you remember it, because we're going to reference this name later on in future steps. So now that we've created the database, we've created that empty container for our database data, we can now create a database user. A database user, all that is essentially like a designated account for your database, so to speak, that has control of editing this particular database that we created, this empty new database. So we have to create it in order to essentially follow through with the next couple of steps that will involve the database. So in that same page that you just were at, where you created your database, you're going to scroll around until you find the Add New User section, as you can see on the right on my screenshot. And again, you're just going to fill out what it asks of you here. It's asking for you to create a username, a password, and then just to confirm your password. If you already have a password that you have in mind, you can type that in, or in the red box that I highlighted there, there's a password generator that will automatically generate a password for you. Just make sure that whatever username and password that you do create, just like the previous step, you'll want to make sure that you save these details down either on like a separate Word document or on a piece of paper so that you're keeping track of what your password is and what your database username is. Once you do this, you can go ahead and click the Create User button in blue, and you will be all set. It'll take no time at all. It'll just automatically give you a success message saying MySQL user or database user has been created. So now, up to this point, we've created an empty database container and we've created a new database user. And now we can go on to the next step. And that's going to be to assign that database user we created to the database. Just by default, the system won't know that the new user is assigned to a database or has control over a database. So we actually have to make that relationship known to the system. So that's what this step is all about. It's pretty simple. Um, Again, it's all going to be in this exact same page that you're on. You're just going to scroll down to a section that says add user to database, as you can see on the right side in this image here. And it's going to be like a drop-down menu when you click on this. So for the database drop-down menu, you'll click on that. If you have other websites on your Bluehost account, you might see a bunch of other databases in here. But specifically, what you'll want to look for is the new database that you created. So right here, you can see highlighted in yellow, I selected the underscore my site database here that I created. And then same for the user, I created underscore my user is the user database user that I created. So you'll want to select those two. Once you do that, you just create add, or you click on add, the blue button there, and that relationship will be made and you will be taken to a new screen. It'll just ask you, okay, you want to assign this user to this database. How much control do you want this user to have over this database? Or it'll just essentially say, what permissions do you want to set on this user? And that'll essentially determine how much control that particular user has over the database. We're not going to really care about that too much. We're going to keep it super simple. Just click on the next button that you see. Essentially, it'll assign this user to have all permissions. So essentially like administrative control over this database. And that'll just keep it super simple and we can move forward. So up to this point, we've created the database, we've created the new user, and we've associated the user with the database so that they know that the user has control over the database. So that's where we're at right now. So far, so good. Now we can go ahead and move on to the next step, which is finding your newly created database. So in the exact same screen, you should still see the left-hand sidebar, which is your Bluehost dashboard sidebar. And you're gonna go look under that advanced tab again, which should be in like the bottom left-hand corner. And you'll see a button that says PHP My Admin. Now, PHP My Admin is more of an advanced software that allows you to interact with your database. You essentially could have total control over database details and data. But again, for our purposes, we're not really going to dive too deep into that end. We only really need it for one thing, and it's very simple. So you don't have to really be concerned or feel overwhelmed about this particular software. But you are going to want to click on PHP My Admin so that it loads up on your browser screen. Once PHP My Admin loads up, you'll see something that looks like, it'll say PHP My Admin in big capital letters on the screen in the top left. You can see my screenshot on the right here. And you'll see a list of all of your created databases along the left-hand side. As you can see in my screenshot, there's quite a few websites that I have that have databases here that I've created. But specifically, we're looking for that one that we created at the very start. And you can see underscore my site is in there that I highlighted in yellow. you'll want to click on that database name and you'll see it selected. It'll kind of turn dark gray. That's how you know when it's been selected on your screen. Now, once you've selected your database in phpMyAdmin, we're going to move on to the importing phase, which is essentially dumping all of the data in that .sql file backup into the database. So that way it populates the database with all of your previously existing data. And now your website will have something to use and to populate once we get to the later stages of the migration. So again, just to recap, we clicked on the underscore my site. In this case, that's how I named my database. It might look different for you. And you should have written that down so you'll know exactly what that looks like for you. But once you've clicked on it, you'll see the main screen on the right will change a little bit. And that doesn't matter too much. What you'll want to look for kind of towards the top center of the screen is there will be a import button. It'll say import. You could see my second red arrow there points directly at it. You'll click on import and it'll load your screen into what it looks like here on my screenshot. There's a lot of details in this particular screen, but don't worry about that too much. This is just some of these details we're not even going to touch. So all you really have to focus on is what's highlighted in yellow here. We're going to click on that choose file button. That'll open up a menu essentially for you to select the .sql file backup that we saved on our computer. So whether you have a Windows or a Mac, or maybe you're fancy, you have a Linux system, whatever it is, you're just going to navigate to wherever your .sql file is on your computer. You're going to click on that and you're going to open it. So here in this example, in my screenshot, you can see I have a Windows 10 system. It opens up my files and looks like I have my database.sql saved on my desktop. So I just click on that and then I click on open, and that'll populate the SQL file into this importer. And after you do that, that's all you have to do. Again, you can ignore the rest of the details on this page and just scroll all the way down to the bottom. And you'll want to find this oval shaped go button and click on it. I highlighted it in yellow there with a red arrow. You'll click on that go button and you'll see kind of like your browser will start spinning up a little bit. It's essentially working on importing all of that data. So don't be too worried. It may take a little bit of time if you don't see any movement right away, especially like it depends on how big your website is that you're migrating. It could either be really big or it could be really small. So the amount of time it takes for the data to import will vary from person to person. But as you can see on my screenshot here, once it successfully imports, you're going to see a green pop-up message that shows up saying import has been successfully finished. And your database that you selected on that left-hand sidebar, you can now see all of the different data that has been imported into your database. And it may be like super long, just depending on your website. But as long as you see something there, that means that everything's gone smoothly and your database import has been successful. So yeah, once you've done this, you've pretty much finished all of the things that involve the database for now. So that is awesome. We've gone through a nice chunk of the portion of the migration so far. Now we can move on to step number 3, which is uploading your WordPress backup. Now, uploading your WordPress backup will be moving a lot of things. So this may feel like the longest part of the migration, but again, just take your time with it, go slow. And again, if you're looking at this recording in the future, you can feel free to pause wherever you need to kind of look at the screenshots I show and everything. So we'll move forward. In order to actually begin these movements of the files, we're going to go back into our Bluehost dashboard. So if you remember this advanced tab, you should be kind of familiar with it by now since we've seen it a few times. That advanced tab will be in the bottom left-hand corner of your Bluehost dashboard. And you'll want to look for the file manager text or button and click on it. Now, if you're familiar with the file manager or not, you might not be familiar with it, but think of it as managing files in your own computer. You know, if you have a Windows or a Mac, you have your downloads folder, you have your desktop folder and your documents folder, and you're constantly saving things into these various folders like files, pictures, etc. The file manager pretty much acts like an entire file management system similar to your own computer. So if you're new to this, don't feel too overwhelmed. It should function fairly similarly, and I'll guide you through the steps of how to navigate inside of it. But once you've clicked on the file manager, it'll load up on your screen and it'll look like this. Now, in particular here, what we're looking to do is we're going to create a site backup folder that will contain the backup files that you've saved on your own personal computer. So essentially, we're going to grab the files from your computer and put it on your Bluehost server so that they are safe and contained in there. And the way to do this is in the top left-hand corner, you will see a button that says plus folder or plus sign folder. And you'll click on that and it'll open up a pop-up window. And it's just asking you, okay, what do you want to name this folder that you want to create, this brand new folder? And you'll just type it in. You can name this whatever you want, but for my sake, I called it site-backup. So you'll type that in, and then you can click on the create new folder button. Once you click on that create new folder button, it'll just show up in your file manager. You'll see it refresh briefly. And as you can see on my animated GIF here, it shows you how that looks like. Once we've created the site-backup folder, we can now upload the website backup. Now, you're going to double click on that site-backup folder or whatever you may have called it in your on your end. You know, it could be anything really. You'll double click on that newly created folder and you'll see an uploads button kind of closer to the top, almost close enough to that plus folder, but except it'll have like an up arrow. So you'll click on that upload button and now it'll ask you to select a file to upload. Essentially, we're going to place the files into this folder. So when you click on select file, it will ask you, okay, which file do you want to upload? And then you're just going to scroll around in your computer file system until you find that .zip file backup. And you'll just click on, you know, open or select, and it'll open up and start uploading that .zip backup. And then you'll want to do the same for your .sql. So you're going to do 2 uploads, one for your .zip and one for the .sql. So you'll follow these steps twice if needed. And the uploads, don't be concerned if it takes a while. Again, it'll very much vary depending on how big these files are. If there's a lot of data or you have a large website, maybe you're an e-commerce shop or a photography blog, those usually tend to have large amounts of files, and it might take a little bit longer for you to actually upload the file. So if you're at this stage, you know, feel free to get up, go get a cup of coffee or water while it uploads, do something for a couple minutes and then come back. And by the time you come back, everything should be uploaded in your file system. So that is awesome. So now we can go ahead and move on to the next step here. And that will be to extract the website backup. So extracting the website backup, what does that mean exactly for those that are unfamiliar? Essentially, the .zip file is essentially like a box, like a container, and it has all of your WordPress files in it. So essentially, we're just gonna grab like a box cutter and like cut up that tape, open the box, and just remove all of the stuff out of this container box. if that makes sense. So the way that you would do that is you can see there's these two files that I've uploaded to my file manager. I'm going to right click on my-site.zip and you'll see a contextual menu show up. And you're going to click on the extract button. And once you do that, you'll see a little pop-up show up. And that pop-up will just say some stuff like, okay, you want to extract this, are you sure? And you'll just click extract files, the next button, and then just wait a few minutes for that to complete. Again, like the previous steps, if you have a big website, it may take a while for that to happen. So again, you can get up, get some water, come back, and it'll be done. Once you extract the files, one of two things will happen. So what could happen is that once the extraction has fully completed, you'll see a huge list of all of your WordPress files, and you'll be able to notice right away because they start with WP hyphen and then some other stuff. So you might see like WP hyphen index.php or WP hyphen content. There's a huge list of unique WordPress files that your WordPress website needs in order to function. So you might just see that on your current screen right now. Or the other thing that could happen, this just depends on how your website files were packaged by your previous hosting provider when they gave it to you. The other thing that could happen is that you'll see a little folder pop up. It might be named exactly the same as your .zip file, but this little folder might have all of the WordPress files in it. So similarly to how you would navigate to a new folder on your computer, you can just double click on that new folder that got created and you'll see all of those WordPress files in there. So just keep that in mind. These are kind of like the two scenarios that might happen. You might see one of those two versions depending on how your .zip was packaged. So once you've done this, we're kind of like at the halfway point. If you're new to this and you follow along, then that's great. This is kind of like a big bulk of the steps. We still have a little bit more to go, but we're going to move on to step number 4, which is configuring your WordPress files. And again, this is going to involve a few movements as well. So if you're at this point, feel free to get up, stretch, whatever. You can get some water. Again, you don't have to rush through this if you don't want to. Take your time, and then we can jump into to the next step here. And in this case, we need to begin with understanding where we need your website files to go, and that is the file destination, so to speak. So there are usually, at least with Bluehost, some different hosts are different, but with Bluehost, the common locations for files will be, it could be 2 different distinct folders. If the website that you're migrating is your primary domain, and by primary domain, I mean like the main website on your Bluehost account, you'll know because your website, your Bluehost account may be named after this domain. So if your website is called mycoolwebsite.com, that's how you know that maybe your Bluehost account is maybe named after that, and that's your primary domain. If that's the website you're migrating, then your files will likely go in a folder called public_HTML. Public_HTML essentially is the publicly facing file system to the entire world. So whenever somebody visits your website on their browser, these are the files that get loaded on their computer for them to see your website. So that could be one potential destination. The other destination could be public_HTML / and then a folder name. This is usually named after like your website's name. And this situation applies if the website you're moving isn't like the main website on your Bluehost account. Maybe you already have like a few websites on your Bluehost account, and this is like the 4th one that you're creating or you're migrating. This will be like the subfolder inside of public underscore HTML. So it might be named something like public underscore HTML slash my cool website. And that might be the other destination for your files. So again, it's critical to understand where your files will go so that you don't get confused or place the files in the wrong place. Because if you don't do that, then when you go to review your website, it might just be a blank page or nothing will show up. So just keep that in mind. Especially if you're new to moving files or just migrating websites in general and you're not as familiar with like website file systems, feel free to contact us. We have our own support chat and support phone number. You can just ask like, hey, I have these website files. I'm not entirely too sure where they need to go. Can you point me in the right direction? And then our support staff will definitely help you out and guide you on like where exactly you should put your files and what your destination will be. But with that being said, you should know exactly where your files will go as we move forward. So let's go ahead and talk about cleanup. And when I'm talking about cleanup, let me pose this analogy for you. If you are currently living in your house, you might be listening to this right now from your house. Maybe you, in this example, like with a website migration, maybe you're looking to move to a new apartment or to a new house, and everything that's involved in that, you're packing up your stuff, your furniture, everything into boxes, and you're going to move that to the new house. But you can't really move your stuff if the previous owner or the previous tenant is still in that house, right? Ideally, you would want to make sure that the previous owner has moved out all of their stuff out of your newly owned house, and so that you can move your furniture and stuff in there, right? So this is what I talk about when we're talking about website cleanup. If you have an old website that exists, that you'll want to make sure that you remove that or move the contents of that old website so nothing clashes, so to speak. So hopefully that analogy makes sense. But in order to do that, you're going to be in the file manager, and we're going to navigate to the home directory. Quick way to get there is you can see a little image here with the red arrow pointing to home. You can just click on that if you're elsewhere, and it'll take you right into the home directory. If it's grayed out and clicking on it does nothing, then you're in the right place. Once you do that, we're going to go in the top left corner, click on that new folder icon. And you've done this already, so you'll see a pop-up and it'll ask you for the name of this folder. You're just going to call this old-content-backup. You can call it something else if you want to, but for the sake of this, old-content-backup is good. And then you can see I typed it in here in yellow, and then you're going to go ahead and create new folder by clicking on that button. And this is essentially going to be the container or like a backup folder of our old website backup or our old website if we have it. So just keep that in mind. We'll go ahead and move on and into the actual cleanup side of things. So we're going to move over to the destination folder. So if you remember, this could be either public underscore HTML or public underscore HTML slash site name. And you can do that by just clicking through the file system. If you don't remember where public underscore HTML is, you can just usually look on the left-hand sidebar with all those little folder icons. And you can just click on public underscore HTML there. And you can also click on the subfolder if that's where your destination is in there as well. Once you arrive at the destination folder, if you see a bunch of old files in there, then what you can do is there's going to be a button, and you can see this GIF is kind of showing you how to do this, but there's going to be a button that says select all. That'll select all of the contents in the current folder that you're in. And once you do that, you're going to look for the move button. That's going to be in the top left-hand corner. Once you click the move button, a little pop-up will show up, And it's going to ask you, okay, looks like you want to move stuff. Where do you want to move all this stuff to? And this is where you're going to type in the destination of this move. So you're going to type in this case, for my example, I'm going to type in / old content backup. And that'll tell the system, okay, you want to move these old files into this old content backup folder. So once I click that and click OK and confirm it, click on the Move Files button, you'll just see all of those files just poof, just disappear, and it'll look completely empty to you if you did this successfully. So if you see kind of like an empty screen, then you have been successful. Now, a side note, if you have multiple websites, like I described earlier, you might have a situation where there's multiple websites on your hosting account. You may not want to select all when you go to like highlight all of your folders and files. Especially if you're a little more savvy with the file manager, you may want to just select only certain files that you know for a fact are your old website files, because maybe some other folders there are for your other websites, right? And you don't want to move those, because if you move those, your other websites might go down. So you're able to select specific files by just holding down the control button on a Windows machine or the command key on the Windows machine. And you can just start clicking on the specific files and folders that you know for a fact are your old content. And then you can go ahead and follow the steps that I outlined here, which is click on the move button, type in the old content backup, et cetera, et cetera. If you're not familiar at all, like if you don't want to mess with this too much and you're kind of worried that you don't know what your old content is, go ahead and call us. Go ahead and chat with us, and our Bluehost support team will be more than glad to tell you, what files you should consider moving to this backup folder. Okay. So awesome. We've moved everything to this backup folder. Now we're going to copy the new files in here so that we're ready to rock and roll with our new WordPress website. So the way that we're going to do this is we're going to go back to that home directory. That home directory, again, if you remember, there's this little home button with the little house. You can click on that and it'll take you back to that home directory. And if it's gray, again, that means you're in the right place. Now we're going to navigate to the site-backup folder that we created pretty much like at the start of this cleanup phase. So you'll double click on that. And then you're going to go ahead and click. In this case, when I extracted my .zip files, you can see I have a little folder. Not all my WordPress files aren't in here in this particular folder. I have to actually double click on this my-site folder. And as you can see all of these WordPress files. These are the critical files for my website. So I'm going to click on the select all button. It'll highlight everything for you. You can see it'll select it all in blue. And once you do that, we're going to go ahead and click on the copy button. And this is just so that we can retain this backup in the future. We're just making an exact copy of all of these files instead of just moving them, because we can retain this backup in the future in case anything goes wrong, anything goes haywire. We can always come back and restore from these files in the future if anything were to go wrong. So you'll click on that copy button. Once you do that, you're going to type in the destination folder. And by this point, you might already know where your destination folder is. So you can just type in, in my case, you can see this example. My destination folder is public_HTML / my-site. So I'm going to go ahead and type that in, and you can type in whatever version it is for you. And I'm going to click on that copy files button. And then you'll just see it work a little bit. It might take a little bit of time, but yeah, you just wait for it, get up. We've done a lot of steps so far, so you can get up, get some water, come back. Once it's done, then you'll be able to keep on going with the next following steps. So now that we've made that the copy of all these files and folders, Now we can move on to configuring the database. If you remember the database that we created at the beginning of this is where we're going to use that information. So we're going to navigate to the destination folder. If you've gotten a little bit more familiar with the file manager, then you might be already jamming. You might be like double clicking and going to the right direction. Another shortcut, if you know where your destination folder is, you'll see this like search bar looking thing in the top left-hand corner of the file manager. You can type in the destination in there. So for example, for me, I typed in public_HTML/my site, and I click the go button, and it just takes me right to that destination. And you can see now I'm faced with all of my WordPress files that I just recently made a copy of. And I'm going to look for a specific file. This is the critical database configuration file for all WordPress websites. So all of you that have a WordPress website will 100% have this. And once you find it, it's called wp-config.php. Once you find it, you'll want to hover over that with your mouse and right click, and then click on the edit button that shows up. Once you click edit, there will be another confirmation window that says, are you sure you want to edit? You could just click on edit again, and it will take you into an editor for this particular file. Now, what you'll see in front of you might look a little daunting, might look a little overwhelming. It's essentially code. So it might feel a little unnerving to like see all this code in this particular file, and you might be a little nervous, but don't worry. There's nothing that you can really mess up here. If you feel like you've messed up, you can always like press the back button in your browser button and then just try again, because you haven't saved anything, right? So don't worry about this. It's really harmless to make the edits in this particular file. Don't be too concerned if you're not as familiar with touching WordPress files in this way. But we're gonna go ahead and look in this file for 4 particular lines of code here. We're gonna look for DB name, these following variables. It's gonna be called DB_name, DB_user, DB_password, and DB_host. And maybe you've already caught on, DB just means database. It's just shortened. And you can see my screenshot on the right. It shows you exactly what these variables will look like in this file. And everybody's file configuration file will look the exact same usually. Like 95% of the time, this will look exactly the same. So this screenshot should look very similar to what you'll see in the editor. And what you'll want to replace, you can kind of see that it says define parentheses, the DB name, and then there's a comma, and then there's like single quotes surrounding a piece of information. So what you're going to be replacing is the second set of single quotes in that red box that I've highlighted. Inside of those single quotes, you're going to delete whatever's inside of those, and you're going to replace that with what you wrote down on that piece of paper, or maybe you put it on your Word document. You can copy and paste that in there if you did that. But you're going to replace each one of these variables with that data that you saved on your piece of paper or document. That way, you're making the correct configuration to the newly created database that you've made. So, and then for the database_host, this could vary, but you'll just want to change that to localhost. So if it says anything other than localhost, you can delete whatever's inside of those single quotes and then just replace it with localhost, and you should be good to go. Now, hopefully I haven't lost you at this point, because this is probably like the most complex part of all of these steps. But once you've done this and you're feeling confident, maybe if you're not feeling too confident, you can always, again, call us. We'll tell you exactly where to go to configure these so that, you're 100% like, yeah, I got it. This is the correct stuff. This is what I edited and it looks good. But, you should be good by this point. Now, all you really have to do is save the changes. If you don't save the changes, then the changes won't take place. So you'll see a blue button in the top right-hand corner. you'll want to click on that Save Changes button, and it'll just spin for a little bit, and it'll be very quick. Usually it'll say success. You'll see like a success message of some sort. And once you do that, then you can click on the close button, which is right next to the Save Changes button. So you should be good to go. You've pretty much done the bulk of the work at this point. So if you've gotten to this point, congratulations. I commend you and your fortitude. I know that was a lot of information, a lot of like uh, kind of an info dump, so to speak, but these are the necessary steps that you would have to take in order to migrate your WordPress website successfully. And if you've done this, then you're a pro. You're good to go. And again, congratulations. Now, as I said, there's still 2 big steps, but they're relatively short to follow. So we'll move on to step number 5, which is finalizing your migration. Now, for finalizing your migration, you've done the bulk of the work at this point, and you're like, phew, all right, what can I do to finish this thing? There are going to be 3 options that are available to you to actually essentially say like, okay, instead of having my website files on my old host, I want to tell, some system somewhere to now say like, okay, my files are now with Bluehost. That's what the goal is going to be. So here, I'll put the 3 options on the screen for y'all so I can explain each one of these. Now, the first option is going to be transferring your domain to Bluehost. And a domain, just as a quick recap, if you're unfamiliar, is like what you type in your browser bar to visit a website, like mycoolwebsite.com. That is your domain. And you might have registered this domain with a third party or your previous host. So you can actually call them up and say, hey, I'm looking to transfer my domain from you guys to Bluehost. And they will give you the steps that are needed to do this. So that's one option. When the transfer of the domain happens, it might take a couple of days, but once the transfer is done, what usually happens is some stuff gets changed in the background to automatically point your web, essentially your server and your domain to your files on Bluehost. So pretty much everything you've configured. So that's one option for you. The second option is you can change your name servers. And your name servers are essentially kind of like an authority saying like, this is where your website files are. So if your name servers might be with like your previous hosting provider, and you can change that to Bluehost name servers. So that is an option. And that'll just say, okay, this is where my website files are now. These are with Bluehost now. And usually you can change that with your old hosting provider or your domain registration or a location. You can change that there. And your third option is you can change what's called an A record. And you'll usually want to do this option if you have like both website and email that you're managing on the web. Like maybe you have your email with Microsoft Office 365, or you might have it with Google G Suites. You might have your email stuff there, and you want to not affect your email. You only want to change where your Bluehost files are pointing. You can do that, and that's by doing that, you would change an A record. Now, I know maybe this might sound like completely foreign, like what is he talking about? Name servers, A record, what is all of that? I know it's a little bit complex, especially if you're newer to the web hosting world. We're actually going to be covering domains, what they are, a little bit more advanced topics, so that more in depth on next month's webinar. So keep an eye out for future emails and blog posts about that. But again, we're going to go more in depth in that if you're wanting to know a lot more about web domains and what they are and all the options that you have with those. But if you're at all confused about these 3 options, again, you can also call our support team. They'll be able to essentially say like, you can explain your situation to them like, oh yeah, I have emails with G Suite, but I have my website now with Bluehost, but how do I finish this migration off? They'll tell you exactly the steps that you should take. And you can just follow those steps and you'll be good to go. So these are the finalizing options. Usually when you do any of these three options that I detailed above, there's something called propagation time, or it's really just the amount of time it takes for these changes to uh, essentially take place across the entire world, because it's the World Wide Web. There's a bunch of servers all over the world that need to update at the same time to say, oh, okay, this website's now pointing to Bluehost, and they all have to kind of correlate with each other. And this can take usually 24 to 48 hours. So just keep that in mind. Your website shouldn't go down or anything um, when this happens. So again, this is just some extra details that to keep in mind in the background. So yeah, once you've finalized, then we're pretty much at the home stretch, which is just reviewing your website. So maybe you've transferred your domain to Bluehost and everything's been updated in the background, all those fancy details that I was talking about, all that foreign French stuff I was like talking to you about. But now we can check your website. And the way that you can check and make sure that your website is now working on Bluehost is just visiting it. You can just type in mycoolwebsite.com on your browser, and you'll just be able to visually see it. If nothing's changed, if everything looks pretty much like the same as it did before, then that is probably like great news, because that means everything's gone smoothly. You don't want anything to have changed at all. That's what a successful migration looks like. Nothing's changed. Everything pretty much looks the same, operates the same, and you're going to be wondering to yourself, man, all that work and nothing looks different. But I mean, that's just the reality of it. So that's like the end goal. That's how we know everything's good. Now, if you really want to take that extra step to make sure that everything's been moved correctly, there is a website called whatsmydns.net. And this allows you to essentially type into like this search bar your website name. So if, mycoolwebsite.com, you type that in and you select like the A record, or in that drop-down menu, you can type in or select name servers like I talked about before. It'll tell you what those are across the entire world. It'll show you like a world map, and it'll say, this is where this domain is pointing to. It's pointing to Bluehost or something like that. That's what it'll tell you. So you can take this extra step if you'd like, to just have like that extra peace of mind to know that everything's been migrated successfully. And then finally, you can just verify everything. Everything should be good to go at this point. And if you've gotten to this point, then you're good. You're ready to rock and roll. This is a screenshot here on me looking up the name servers of this particular domain I was looking up, and you can see on the right-hand side, there's a server in New York that says, yep, this domain is pointing to Bluehost. There's one in California saying, yep, Bluehost. Even like Mexico and Brazil, they're all saying that my website's pointing to Bluehost, and that's like the green light. That's like, yes, success. Everything's working. So awesome. Now we've gotten to this point, dealing with roadblocks. Sometimes you might run into some missteps. Maybe your website, you visit your website, some things don't look right. Don't be too concerned. We want to make sure that we can get those resolved as fast as possible. So just give our support team a call. Here's our phone number. Give us a chat, and then we're going to go ahead and do our best to make sure like we can figure out any sort of mishaps that might have happened if they do happen. But hopefully if you follow these steps, everything should have been pretty smooth, pretty straightforward, and nothing should look any different than what I've described here. If maybe you've gone through this entire process and maybe you're just a little overwhelmed and you'd rather seek some more direct help, somebody to help you do this, we do offer a migration service, and if you do decide to go forward with that, it'll ping my team to essentially help you out, and we'll collect all the information we need in order to migrate your website for you. So that is also an option available to you if you don't want to follow these steps. So yeah, with that being said, we're done. So awesome. We can now talk about any questions you may have, and I'll turn it over to Devin. Or were there any questions that we want to answer?
There are a couple questions. First of all, thank you, Gabe, and thank you everyone for sticking through this. I know this is a lot of information and it's a lot to unpack. And Gabe, I really appreciate you coming and stopping by today and walking us through this all. And as I mentioned at the beginning, this recording or a recording of this webinar will be available on our blog within the next 24 or 48 hours. So if you didn't follow everything, don't stress out. You can come back in and watch this, pause it, go through the steps, wait for the extraction to happen, wait for the files to download, and go at your own pace as you go through this. However, there were a few questions that I want to give you an opportunity to answer. Wendy came out with the first question: how do I migrate my emails associated with my site?
Awesome. Yeah, great question. So this will depend on how you have your email set up. Migrating emails is a little bit more complex. There could be a lot of moving parts just depending on how they're set up. Um, so most people, like if you have a service such as like Office 365 or G Suite, we found that most people like that setup, those platforms, and they don't really want to change anything about those. So if that's your situation, then my recommendation to you is to maybe just stay with that platform, because that's usually what most people want. They want that experience and all the services that those platforms have to offer. Um, Migrating your emails on a manual basis is a little bit more complex. So if you had like your emails with your previous provider, um, we do offer a service that allows us to migrate your emails for you, just emails only. That would probably be the easiest way because again, there's a lot of small details and minutia with email migrations that can get a little hairy. So there's a lot of articles on Google on how to do these, but my best suggestion is like, well, you can employ our help and we can help you with that.
Yeah, and I'm faintly familiar with that process, and I'll just echo what Gabe said. It is a little bit more complex. You get involved with mail exchange servers, which is a little bit different than just the regular servers that your websites are hosted on. So there's a few more steps that get into that. The next
Right.
question today, someone said, I would like to move a site I created on my subdomain to my main site on Bluehost. What's the best way to do this?
Gotcha. So essentially you already have your website on Bluehost. And you're essentially doing like a Bluehost to Bluehost migration, which is great. So it kind of cuts out all of the initial steps already. My best recommendation for that is you're going to want to do the cleanup phase first. So if your main site, it'll probably be in public underscore HTML, and you'll want to move that into like a containment folder, like the old website backup folder that I talked about. You'll want to clean that up, and then you're going to move everything from your subdomain folder to that main folder, which should be public underscore HTML if we're following what you're describing. And then once you do those two steps, the last thing that you'll want to do if it's a WordPress site, um, you're going to want to do what's called a URL change. Your subdomain might be under a completely different web domain. It could be myawesomesite 2.com or something like that, but you just want it to be myawesomewebsite.com. You make those changes in the database. We were talking about PHP MyAdmin earlier. You can actually make those changes. My best recommendation in that, if you don't want to touch PHP MyAdmin, is you can give our team a call. Our support team can actually do URL changes. They'll be able to say, oh, okay, you want to change your subdomain to your main site? Okay, cool. We'll change that to the new name. So after you've moved all your files into the correct destination, then make that URL change happen, and you should be good to go after that.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I know that whenever you go into PHP MyAdmin and start messing with database changes, things things start to get a little bit tricky. So it's good to know that the
Sure.
Bluehost tech support can help walk you through that process.
Absolutely.
Someone else asked a similar question to the previous one, and you might have already answered it. They asked, if my site is already hosted on a Bluehost account and I'd like to migrate it to a new Bluehost account, which steps can we skip, or are all the steps the same?
Um, all of the steps, I mean, there really isn't any steps to skip. I would pretty much follow every step pretty similarly. You'll want to get that website back up, so you can do that from either a support team will help you with that, or you can do that yourself if you're familiar. And then just follow the exact same steps on the new Bluehost account. You'll create the database, you'll import the database, all that stuff that I talked about will be pretty much the same. The only thing that will be different for you in this particular case is the finalizing steps. I gave you 3 options that you could do with those finalizing steps. Because you're already in a Bluehost environment, you don't really have to do those 3 steps. There is actually a 4th step that opens up for you. Um, and that is just moving the domain from the old account to the new account. And it's actually fairly simple, but you might want to have our support team help you out because it might involve you making some adjustments to your old hosting Bluehost account in order to facilitate that domain moving to the new account. So I would definitely call our support team, let them know that you're wanting to do that. And we have tools on our end that allow us to move your domain to the new account. That'll be probably the easiest way to do it once you reach that point when you're ready to finalize.
And transferring a domain is a step, obviously, in migrating a website. And as you mentioned
Mhm.
previously, we are going to be taking a little bit of a look at that in next month's webinar. All the
Mhm.
intricacies that go in with transferring a domain, why it's important to have a domain, and how to make sure you're getting the right one. So be sure to tune in for that. Um, let's see. Someone asked, how does this process change if I'm migrating a site to replace an old site? So I'm assuming that means they built a site in a staging or a development environment, and then they'd like to move it into where a site already exists.
Gotcha, gotcha. Yeah, so the steps should be pretty much the exact same. If you have an old site, I did describe a section in here where you do want to do that cleanup where you remove the old site files from your destination folder. I was kind of giving you a silly analogy of like, you want to make sure the house that you're now going to move to, you make sure that the old tenant or the old owner has moved out all of their furniture and stuff. That's essentially the step that I was describing. All the steps should be pretty much the same for you in this particular case. If you follow from start to finish, you should get to the end result, which is migrating everything correctly.
Great. The next question
Mhm.
I have here, my friend recommended just using a plugin to migrate my website. Is that a good idea?
Yes. So to those who are not familiar, like there are WordPress plugins out there that's essentially like an extension to your website that facilitate a migration for you. And yeah, you can actually use these methods as well. These are pretty comparable to the steps that we just took. The the main thing that I would caution you with migration plugins is that there's a lot of them. They all have different things about them, maybe some limitations. Sometimes they may only migrate up to like 10 megabytes of data. And if you want to migrate more, you might have to pay a premium price, like $20, $50, whatever it may be, to migrate more data. So again, some of them might be a little finicky, some might have limitations. If you're on like an older hosting platform, then sometimes it could we've even seen some sites kind of like break because of it, but it's usually recoverable. But again, there's some cautionary tales with using plugins. If you want to kind of do the way that we described here, like the manual way, that this is usually the most efficient, most reliable way of doing it. But you're definitely welcome using plugins if you would rather do that. And most plugin developers, if you do like purchase premium pricey plugin, they might have the documentation that you may have to follow that is entirely different from what we just described.
Great. Well, I think that brings us to the end today. If we didn't get to your question, be sure to tune into the blog post that we have. We should get the FAQs up as well as this slide deck and the link to the video up on that blog post within the next 24 or 48 hours. So, Gabe, huge thank you for walking us through this. I know this can be a tricky process, but you laid it out super easy. So I'm really grateful for that. So high five to you, high five to everyone that stuck around and joined us today. Thank you all, and hopefully we'll see you all next webinar next month. Bye, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Have a good one, everybody.